All right, I'm going to assume everyone can hear me. If you want to give a POI, please give it in the chat instead of verbally. Across the world, religion is facing a crisis of confidence. In countries with rapid economic development, people are leaving the church and turning away from religion. In countries where religion has a strong grip, they're often plagued by religious violence and sectarianism that threatens the lives of their own members. We plan to solve both of these problems on our side of the house. First, let's start with the model. Religious pluralism, as said by the motion clarification, is a world where all religions are considered equally valid and that all religions can offer salvation. So we think that this largely would look like leaders of different religions, such as the Pope or the Dalai Lama, openly espousing this philosophy. We also think it probably looks like interfaith displays of interaction. So for example, religious leaders sitting down together to discuss their religions, and in general, sending a strong message that they are okay in cooperating with each other. The last thing that I want to frame before we get into this debate is that this isn't something that has never occurred before. We think that there are major religions around the world, such as pluralism, such as Buddhism, which do to some extent are okay with pluralism and acknowledge the fact that other religions also exist and that other religions are also valid. We don't think this is some new made-up concept that has never occurred in the society before. That being said, on to my first argument then about why this actually cements religious identity for most people. And I want to be very clear about my framing. In most developed countries, church attendance, mosque attendance, even in countries that have a strong religious history like Spain, is rapidly falling. And we think that this is often correlated with economic growth. And considering the fact that most countries around the world have been an upward trajectory towards economic growth, we think that the loss of religious members is a serious threat for all religions going forward. And we think that this is for a variety of reasons. The fact that as people get more educated, they often have busier lives, busier jobs, so that it's less important to attend church. The fact that because they have individual streams of income, they no longer rely on the church. The fact that with education, a lot of people no longer believe in the things of the church that they believe are discriminatory against other people or other types of identities. That being said, though, we think that there are four things that change on our side of the house. The first is that we think this makes religion a lot more palatable for the tons of people in the modern world who are spiritually lost. That is to say, there are so many people today who pursue things like crystals, astrology, chakras. And the reason that they care about these things is that people do want to seek spiritual guidance, that they want faith, that they want some kind of confidence that there's someone out there looking out for them or there is some path that they can follow. The problem is that many of the aspects that turn people off religion are the ideas of extremism, the idea that other identities are wrong and that your religion is the only one that is correct. These kinds of harsh ideas often perpetuate the idea that people already have, that the church is intolerant, that the church is not friendly to other identities. We think that these people who are desperately seeking religious faith and religious identity are far more likely to be open to joining religion, or at the very least open to exploring the idea of actively joining any religion when they feel like not only can they shop around, but also that they will be accepted and that they don't have to treat other members of other religions any worse. I'll take that clarification from OL.
This is a debate about religious people in general, not only about churches and centralized religious institutions, right?
Yes, I'm going to talk about how this affects religious people. But I think that it is very important for religious people who want to have lots of people in the religion, who want to have a bustling church, who want to have other people of their faith that they can interact with, that they want people to join the religion and be active members of the religion. But the second, and I think that this is very, very important in terms of cementing religious identity, is that we live in a world where a lot of people are kind of religious based on their upbringing. So you would call yourself culturally Catholic because you grew up Catholic, but you're not actually a very useful member of your religion. You probably don't go to church very often outside of major holidays. You probably don't donate to church. You're not involved in church groups. You're not involved in church community. And so even if you are technically part of your religion, you're not an important member or someone who is necessarily benefiting the community. And that is because a lot of people just feel that they have some obligation to the religion that they're born into, rather than actually identifying and choosing that religion. I think that changes on our side of the house. We think this causes two things. One, churches are forced to actually make an argument for why you should join the religion, besides the fact that if you don't join us, we're going to hell. If you cannot use that argument anymore to actually recruit members, churches are going to have to actually make arguments like these ideas and lifestyles or idioms that we follow are actually going to benefit you, benefit your life, and we have an active and vibrant community that you can join. We also think that this means that people actively choose their identity. When they are no longer afraid of going to hell if they don't believe every single one of the ideologies of their religion, then people are actually going to feel like they opted into that identity, that they weren't coerced into that identity, that they can leave if they want to. We posit that this is far more useful to religious people who, again, if you don't have a strong religious community, if you don't have people who are part of your community who actively believe and are able able to share joy in their faith with you is not actually useful to you. So we posit that that becomes far more enriching on our side of the house. And I also lastly want to flag that this foments conversion. If you are an atheist, for example, you can be very afraid of being judged or not being accepted if you join a religion due to the fact that you were not part of the religion before. Or for example, if you're of a different religion, you marry into a family, you're thinking of converting, people are often scared because they feel that they won't be accepted, they won't be denied. Again, we think this is a huge obstruction to people joining these religious communities and benefiting from religious life in the first place. We think that because of this, it allows people to live much more forgiving, diverse lives where they actually opt into religious identity, and that this is good for both religious people, but also to bolster the ranks of religious people so that they collectively as a community stand taller. Secondly, argument then on how this foments religious peace, because in countries where religion is very strong, say there are theocratic countries or religious leaders play a huge part in politics, religion is often used to divide people. And why is religious singularism an important prerequisite for extremism? Because if you believe I will go to hell if I do not spread my religion, or other people will go to hell if they are not part of my religion, so it's okay for me to enact violence against them because they're going to go to hell if they don't convert anyway. We think that it is the basis of the ideology upon which people used to enact their religion upon others. If you aren't with me, you're going to hell anyways, so why should I care about you and your rights? We think that it is extremely important in these countries for different religious leaders to show that they can be cooperative. This is for two very important reasons. One, a lot of religions actually have similar agendas. So for example, in countries like the United States, if the Christian and Muslim coalitions were able to come together and agree on different political goals, that would actually probably have a lot of similar goals and conclusions for the both of them. But B, in a lot of countries, religions are bitterly divided. So i.e., there may be periods of time or areas of the country where some religions are stronger than others. And that poses a threat to religious minorities in all places, where the balance of power can flip, where they could be the minority, where it is an established norm that other people consider their religion the only religion. And if you don't follow that, you are ungodly, you are living your life wrong in some places. That often leads to conditions where religious people are prosecuted. And of course, that is terrible for religious people when they feel like their beliefs are being oppressed and they feel like they cannot live their lives without facing violence or discrimination. So we think that when leaders cooperate with each other and agree to validate with each other and agree to spread the strong, peaceful message that all religions are valid, that actually creates an idea of protection, that no matter what the balance of power is in that country or in that area, no matter where you are, we can work together towards the same ends. For those reasons, very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that speech and invite the leader of opposition to start the case for OO.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. The primary incentive of the average religious person is to get into heaven because this is ultimate utility. The only way to certainly know that you're going into heaven is to know for certain that your religion is the only one that is legitimate and that no other way would give you the same chance of going into heaven. This is going to be the primary argument coming from opening opposition. Before that, engaging with opening government. First, on the premise of coercion that is used as recruitment. First, this is just purely bullshit. The people that you are recruiting are likely people upon which you're offering food, shelter, job networks, community services, and church services, simply because you must first provide them tangible benefits because they're not yet firm believers. You cannot fool somebody that they'll go to hell, to like hell if they don't go into your own particular church, if in the beginning they're not like a person who cares to begin with. Secondly, in the vast majority of cases, the people that run the churches, that run the synagogues and any other religious establishments have pragmatic incentives to ensure that the people in there receive a maximum amount of community service and treatment that fosters a sense of community. The obvious reason is that they have a selfish incentives. Those people realize that they have a moral obligation that was given to them by God himself to actively help people reach salvation, to reach heaven. This is why they fear for their own chance of going into hell or heaven, and they have a moral obligation to help other people and to actively engage them within that particular community. But secondly, the more you engage the members within the community, the more they're actively showing within the churches instead of privately praying in their homes, the more likely they are to comparatively to make your community appear as more legitimate and more populous in that particular way. The second point they make is about violence. I have two responses to this. Firstly, the average religious person may not completely agree with people that have different religious beliefs, but they're not willing to go into the extreme of waging violence against them. Why is this structurally true? The first reason is that they have a simple and selfish primary incentive. That is to say, you wish to treat them well because if they grow disillusioned with their own different religious community, they're more likely to come into your own religious community, which is a clear incentive for you not to treat them horribly because they will eventually come around. The second is simply the belief of the equality of people above God. That is to say, above in Christianity and in Islam, we believe every single person is united. We are brothers and sisters. Even if we believe in different gods, the other people is simply disillusioned, they're not thinking straight, and they will eventually come around and understand the true path. So you're more likely to not value their opinion, but nevertheless not wage violence against them. The second reason as to why violence is not likely is because in many cases, the actors that like control those institutions have no incentive for violence. The more you are actively instructing for violence, the more of your own members get physically hurt, they cannot do service, the more of them get killed, they cannot come to service, the more resources you have to actively maintain those conflicts. Comparatively, those resources could have went towards increasing the likelihood for your people to go into heaven, to improving your own church networks, to expanding your ability to attract more people. So there is a more proximate incentive not to wage violence. Violence is fucking stupid. Okay, onto the argument. Why is it likely that on their side, people feel as though they cannot certainly go into heaven and the path is highly unclear? Three reasons as to why this is the case. The first reason is that religions are zero-sum. That is to say, the way in which they are designed is specifically done in a way to say that we are the only one true religion and you shouldn't be following any other religions. What are the sub-mechanisms behind this mechanism? Three reasons as to why this is likely to be the case. The first of which is a clear power incentive. You as a religion that is clearly established wish to get a first mover advantage above other religions and to actively encourage other people to see you as the only legitimate actor. This is why within the doctrine of Christianity and Islam, they clearly state that you should not be worshipping or even acknowledging the existence of any other god to begin with, otherwise you are a sinner. And for their narrative to exist, that is to say, for us to spread tolerance and equality of expression, if we are equal, then surely they also have a god that is equally powerful, which cannot exist in the vast majority of cases in that particular way. The second reason is that in many cases, those religions are simply different in the way in which they're designed. They have cultural, social differences, different paths towards salvation. There may be some overlap, but the specific steps like fasting, not eating certain types of food, the amount of community service that you have to do clearly differs. So it's mutually exclusive across different religions. The third reason is that the premise of every single religion is that we have a religious authority that represents the Almighty, the omnipresent God, that is the ultimate ruler of the universe. This is the dominant belief in the most popular religions that are Christianity and Islam, which likely means that it's mutually exclusive because you have to consider other gods exist somehow. For them to be equally legitimate, they must also have the equal amount of like godly power. So this is clearly mutually exclusive. We're basically forcing people to believe to not follow the word of the Bible, which is the most clear way for them to get into heaven. The second reason as to why people are likely to feel worse is simply on the recognition of legitimacy. That is to say, for us to recognize that other religions exist, this means that they are equally legitimate. It's equally legitimate for you to do it, meaning the force behind it is equally legitimate. This reduces the certainty for you as a person. Like, imagine how hard it is to choose a fucking college because you're not certain which one is going to maximize your chances in life. This is that decision 1,000 more. Why? Because if you choose the wrong religion, you could go into fucking hell because you're not following the one true religion. So we prefer for people to have certainty in that particular way. I'll take you in a second. Thirdly, you feel as though when you spread this narrative and a member of your religious community goes into another religion, you're basically sending them into hell. You as a person basically told them to go to swim in like the ocean in which there are sharks because you're condemning them to a different religion that is not compatible, is more likely to send them into hell. Before I continue, close.
Okay, the premise of this is that all religious people and religious leaders say that no matter which of these things you do, you're going to be good. All of them lead to salvation. I don't understand then why you have this terrifying anxiety of the wrong choice.
Because the Bible itself tells you that there is only one God. For you to spread that other religions are worthy must require of you to recognize that other religions also have gods that are equally legitimate. This is a clear contradiction that creates a cognitive dissonance. You feel guilty, you feel confused, you don't know what is the clear path towards salvation. Why is this the most important argument? Firstly, it brings the highest amount of meaning and purpose to the average person. That is to say, the average person wishes to feel moral. They wish to feel certainty that the actions that they are doing actively lead them into hell. This is why many people find meaning and purpose through trying all the actions that they do do for their religious community, the fasting that they do, the restrictions that they do, that all tied to them going into heaven. Secondly, many religious people glorify the concept of the soul because it is omnipresent, it is immortal. Even if your body and mind decay, the soul remains and you wish to preserve it. But thirdly, this is infinite utility. Like heaven is infinite happiness forever and ever and ever, which is something that the average person, if they genuinely believe in religion, are more likely to care about because they want this ultimate salvation. This is basically ultimate utility, which is like infinity versus 8 years on earth. So comparatively, this is the most proximate incentive for the average religious person. Oppose.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that speech and invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for OG.
Okay, everyone can hear me?
Yep.
Cool. I want to start by explaining how religious pluralism is likely to work and how religions are likely to advocate for it. Because I think a lot of the OO case, not all, but a significant amount, unfortunately conflates the way in which religion must be exclusive in the status quo with the way that religious claims remain exclusive in our world. So what's the narrative? Religious pluralism implies that all religions can be valid philosophical ideas, implying that regardless of the religion you're in, if you do the things that are prescribed by that religion, once you profess belief to their God, then you can have salvation. So it doesn't mean at every given point that every religion is correct, because what it posits is that you must do the religious obligations according to another religion. If you become Muslim, then you must do things that are considered by Islam to be spiritually good in order to get the benefits of salvation. Second of all, I don't think it's actually fair, and I just want to flag this from the start, for them to claim that salvation is infinite utility, because no one in the round can make an objective truth claim that people actually get salvation. So what it has to do with is a really strong positive belief, the idea of satisfaction. So if we can win on that claim, then they don't get to claim that it's an infinite utility because magically people believe something. It's just a really good, strong belief, similar to any really good, strong belief. Like my really good, strong belief that I'm not going to face religious violence also brings me happiness. So that is imaginary weight from their side. The first thing I want to talk about is why is it that religion is struggling right now? And I just want to start from the premise that they don't attack at all, which is that a lot of people leave religion right now and are become alienated from religion because the narrative that me and my friends go to heaven, but everyone else goes to hell is unpalatable. Think about how this engages with Opp's argument. Opp's argument is that in our world, no one is going to feel validation from their religion because they'll constantly worry about whether another equally valid idea is true. I have a couple of direct responses to that, but I just want to start with this on the comparative, which is right now, there are people who are born Jewish, born Catholic, born Muslim, who might gain some benefit from actually engaging in their own religion, according, the same that their parents, but they don't want to commit because of choice paralysis. If the commitment is, once I accept this religion, I must accept its truth claims, and no other religions can be true. So if something's better for me, or if I disagree, then I have no choice but to be bound to the morality of that religion in terms of my own likelihood of going to heaven or hell. Then I often move away, right? I move to a city, I get a job, I stop caring about religion, and I'm the type of follower who moves away. But second of all, just really think about this. If you're a religious believer, like let's say you're just like a relatively liberal Christian and you believe in pluralism right now, like you're a Unitarian. When you're a Unitarian in the status quo, even though this isn't the common narrative, goes and prays, it's a meditative experience, right? They're not thinking about whether or not some Muslim halfway around the world is also, making a different truth claim that contradicts theirs, because in the moment, they're not thinking about their 75% confidence interval certainty that they buy into their religion. What they're thinking about instead is the actual experience, the spiritual experience of relating to a God. I agree that there'll be some people on the margin, some people who are thinking about whether or not they want to commit. But at the moment of commitment, religion becomes quite meaningful to people. Why is it good that people are able to convert more easily and face less shame from their family, friends, and political leaders? Remember, the round is from the perspective of all religions, not one religion at any given point. And the reason that's relevant is that if what you care about is religions maximizing the amount of their followers, and then under OO's own weighing, like more people get infinite utility from having salvation in that belief, then what you also care about is people finding a religion that speaks to them. And there are two reasons why that happens more on our side. Number one, intra-religious competition. If all religions have equally valid claims, and at the moment when people are deciding, at the moment when they've, become agnostic or lapsed from religion, do I convert? Do I go back to my parents' religion? Do I move around? Do I become Buddhist? So on and so forth. The religions are exposed to competition. rather than saying that you must be religious because of what our religion says and you go to hell otherwise, they have to convince people that the belief system, that the way of relating to God, that their traditions, that the religious culture are better. And they can't do so in a way that's too aggressive, because then they face criticism from people who can go to other religions more easily, who don't want to be spoken down to, who don't want to be spoken to aggressively. And if more people can find a religion that speaks to them, whose cultural experiences and traditions mean something to them, whose experience of prayer activates something in them mentally, then you have more people who are on net religious followers because they're willing to commit. I'll take the POI from OO.
People opt into religions and remain only if they absolutely, with absolute certainty, understand and know that this will get them salvation and this will get them into heaven. This is the biggest recruitment mechanism ever.
Yeah, so I think for a lot of people that's a mechanism, but this contradicts a lot of the way that religious liberalization happens. So, when a liberal Jew or a liberal Christian goes to their Unitarian church, they're not going because they believe exclusively in the moment that their religion is the only one that's true. What they believe is that this is something super spiritually important that speaks to me. I believe in God. God believes in me because I've chosen this path, because I relate to this identity. And they can still have very meaningful spiritual experiences within that religion, because in the moment of prayer or in the moment of the ceremony, it's not in their head that there are other religions. But in the moment of politics, when their religious leaders meet with other religious leaders and have interfaith dialogue, when they do charity work together. So, for example, in Judaism, we have the ideology of tikkun olam, which says that Jews have an explicit religious obligation, not just to Jews, but to benefit the entire world, even for other religions. Those are the kinds of doctrines and ideologies that increasingly emerge in a world of religious pluralism. And the reason that's relevant is that there are wealth inequalities and social inequalities within countries on the basis of religion. You want religious followers because they have obligations to others and care about others, because then wealthier religions in a given country are likely to donate their money and assist other people. And that also brings people quite significant utility, not least because, as we point out, there's a lowered risk of political violence, but also because of charity. Now, the response of OWA to political violence is to do this very odd thing where they use structural analysis to dispute that religious violence exists. It does, right? Like, think about what happens in India in terms of the mobs that emerge against Muslims. Think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can mitigate the claim. Like, it is true in some level that the average religious believer is not inspired by the religion to take up pitchforks. But what matters is that this is a sufficient condition. This is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition, which is you need to have the belief that your religion is exclusively correct and the others are wrong in order to be activated towards fundamentalism. It doesn't make you a fundamentalist, but it makes it possible to make you a fundamentalist. And when your religion is pushing ideologies that are less pluralist, when you see that your imam or that your pastor is not meeting with other religious leaders, that they're not talking about politics with other leaders, then you also relate less to other people in religions. And that is the process through which, a younger person who sees their family and church act this way can become radicalized over time. And even so, terrorist radicalization, just that you believe that other religions are bad, and therefore you want to enact policies that oppress them, even if you don't engage in violence. What you want to do is, reduce their voting influence or reduce their ability to have their religion in public if you're in Nigeria, for example. There are very clear impacts on that. What's the endpoint? Religion is suffering. People are leaving religion. What OP is doing right now is not working at getting religious followers in the long run. We promised a way to make religions compete, to make people find the religion that means something to them, that creates more religious followers and happier and safer religious followers. Very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech and invite the Deputy Leader of OP to continue the case for OO.
Hi, I presume you can hear me?
Yep.
Cool. POI is in chat. I will take one at 5:30. Just a sec. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Salvation is done by God. If you acknowledge that every religion can give you salvation, you have to recognize that there are other gods in those religions who can give those people salvation. Now, the very first commandment in the Bible is that you should not recognize any other god than Christian God, that you should not believe in any other God to be justified to exist. Once you advocate for this as a religion, it actively makes people fear that you go against the word of God, the only certain thing we have within your religion, which is the scripture. Maybe political like figures or the church tells you one thing, but the book says another thing. So you're constant worry that you can go to hell, that your loved ones who you made religious because you thought it's the best for them will go to hell because of you. This is a constant feeling that makes the most important actors within this debate actively question and live miserable lives throughout it all. Firstly, 2 observations on how this debate should be adjudicated. One, this is an actor motion, meaning it is said that we care mostly about the religious people. Why does this matter? Because firstly, if you opted out of religion or you have yet to opt into the religion, we don't care about this within this motion because you are not truly religious when you have opted out and you believe that this is not a just rhetoric. Or if you are about to join, you still have not sacrificed enough to be called a religious person. But secondly, even if you are one of those people that OG talks about, such as the person who skips church, who is unsure within this religion, this is a less important actor than the people we talk about. Why? One, we are talking about the actually people who dedicate their life to religion, who make sacrifices every day by trying to limit the evil they have inside of them and to perpetuate good every day, to give out their money to people when they could have spent it on themselves, to give out on food that could have made them happier because they believe it would one day pay off. Those people have substantially given out more and are generally the people who will give more in the future, right? Because they will donate more and they will be the ones to stick out. Therefore, even if we have to trade off against some weirdos who are not actually religious yet, I don't care, because this debate is not about that. But secondly, on the metric to which this should be adjudicated, let's say that both top half are talking about the actual religious people. We are the ones that provide to you why our metric is the thing that people care most about. Meaning, at the top of his speech, Biser explains to you that doesn't matter what happens right now, the only more proximate incentive of a religious person is to make sure that they get to heaven. Now, Max says, but heaven maybe exists, maybe don't. We are not sure this is true utility. But every single truly religious person believes that this is okay. They have a strong subjective belief that they should maximize their chances to do so, because otherwise it makes them feel inferior, and they generally feel scared for their life and for their loved ones. OG, even at their best case, don't prove why their arguments are the most important thing for each religious person. They maybe give reasons why it's good, not why it's the most approximate incentive that we should care about. Now, given that I did all this weighing, let's engage with them charitably. Firstly, more people joining the religion. Now, even if more people join the religion, again, I'm not sure how this benefits this motion, but let's say it does. 2 rebuttals towards this. One, Biser already explains to you that once one religion cannot provide you with a true answer, you are in constant worry that you will not get to heaven. Why is this then important? Because it's somewhat challenged. You have to give out your rights, your constant satisfactions in order to make sure you give to hell. You have to be humble. You have to give up against God. You have to admit that you're one person in a grander scheme of things. All of those things are extremely horrible. Being a religious person is extremely horrible. But the one thing that makes it worth it is that you believe that you will get rewarded in the end. To the point at which any religion maybe gives you this. One, you're in constant worry that you chose the wrong religion, because the one religion tells you, and it is shaped to tell you that there is only one God. But if this one God exists, and if the other gods exist, are you committing an active sin by acknowledging that those gods even exist? But secondly, you're more likely to regret your choice, because to the point at which you join, you're in constant panic. Meaning, when something bad happens to you, you think that God is punishing you because you're actively going against his word. When you go into a car crash, you rationalize this as something that you've done wrong, that you're not true to their religion, because you're acknowledging that other gods exist. Therefore, why is this then the most important thing, regardless of what other teams prove? One, it's a constant feeling that takes up most of your time, meaning it's something that's constant, and no matter if GovBench achieves some benefits some of the times, our thing happens all of the time, no matter how old you are, no matter who you are. Secondly, it haunts most of the people within the religion. Therefore, only in fact some new members that come in, it's unclear why this benefits the already existing members within religion. Our claim helps all of them, because even if you are joining right now, you're constantly dissonance to the point which you're not sure if you're making the right decision. This prohibits you from doing things that you love because the constant worry overtakes you. You cannot spend time with your family because you believe you're sinning. You cannot get satisfactions out of life because you believe that you're a sinner who don't deserve to be happy. All of those things are infinitely more important than some subjective benefits that they get on their side. Closing.
Still possible and even likely that people end up doubting their religions on your side, especially when it's viewed as being all or nothing, i.e. it's the religion I was born into or nothing at all because it's monotheism.
That's true. It's about the comparative. Because if you doubt your religion and you decide to be religious no more, then you don't believe in these concepts. You're not questioning yourself that you're actively going against God. But on your side, you are already religious and you're thinking that you're committing a sin. Now, lastly, on their violent stuff, I think Biser gives you sufficient reasons why, systematically, this is most likely the case, even if there are certain outliers. But I will give you a weighing that I think takes this out. This debate is not about the radical people, because if OG framed that this is done by the authorities, most radical people don't buy into the establishment. They're anti-establishment because they believe the church is corrupt. Therefore, the most radical terrorists wouldn't follow this narrative anyways. And this is the huge burden that they just don't prove. Like, if you want to prove that terrorists will change their mind, good luck with that. But I don't think they either do this sufficiently or generally can, because this motion doesn't impact them. By the end of the speech, you should take the following. Many things are uncertain. Maybe it will change certain people's minds. Maybe this will make religions more competitive, even though they're always zero-sum. You can only be with one church, one synagogue, or one mosque. They cannot work constantly together. But what is sure that people's feelings are the most important thing, especially when they've given out the most.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that speech and everyone in top half, and now welcome the Member of Government to start the case for CG.
1 second. Okay. I think the crux of the open opposition case is that if your religion contains contradictions that make it difficult to understand whether or not you're going to go to hell, this is going to cause tons of panic within people. It's going to be really bad for them because they won't have this security in knowing that what they're doing is correct. But I think the problem with that is that religions already contain huge amounts of contradiction. And broadly speaking, people are fine with it, i.e., the Bible might tell people that, you know, they'll go to hell for wearing mixed fabric, but no one gives a shit, because the teaching that they get from their church is that those are not the things that are of particular importance, that rather it's about the broader principles. And most people are content to believe that going to heaven as a Christian, for example, is contingent on having faith, maybe getting baptized, generally being a decent person, without necessarily needing to go into all of the specific teachings of any given sect, including the one that you're in. In that sense, this is, I think, sort of what OG is saying when they're saying that religious pluralism is already common. It's certainly common within certain like sub-communities, like Christianity, which has tons of different like sects of people. And it's generally the way that this ends up happening is that the interpretations given by churches, when you want to have a greater degree of pluralism, become less specific in what they require of you. And this, we're going to use this extension to demonstrate, means that you have to be like a sort of more progressive in the way that you interpret things and the subsequent policies you can push. We're also going to talk about the effect that this has on culture in a way that was not talked about in top half. So in response to OO, I want to talk about how I think this is likely to actually play out in a way that is consistent with people's religious values. Because I think that they sort of pointing at this contradiction misses how this is sort of likely to be interpreted. I think that most people, when they look at their religious like books, for example, don't see all of it as literally true. And there's a big spectrum on what this can look like. It can look like saying that some of it is like designed by God to be sort of metaphorical or viewed in historical context. And it can range all the way to people that are completely secular, like secular Jews, for example, that see it as sort of like a cultural stories that give insight into morality and are the building blocks for like, you know, centuries of moral discussion that's worth learning about for that reason. What this means is that there's tons of ways of, as a religious leader, speaking to your congregation about religion in a way that allows them to see all religions as somehow legitimate. So this looks like, for example, finding things that unite all religions, saying that like, you know, look how all these religions spend time in reflective meditation of some form, spending time studying stories to learn how to be a good person. These are like morally good things. Most of them will point out that like certain prescriptions, like not murdering people, are universal. And sometimes they'll use this as justification that all of them stem from some sort of divine inspiration, which is why they all managed to stumble upon the same conclusions. These arguments are a bit silly, but like they are made by tons of religious leaders and to a relatively reasonable degree of efficacy. The thing about this is twofold. One, it takes down a lot of OO because it gives this framework for viewing religion that is likely to be taught to people that removes this like horrifying fear that like maybe you picked the wrong thing, that I think a lot of people have already been demonstrated to buy into status quo and are likely to buy into when this is the narrative being pushed by every religious leader. But the second thing is that it makes the type of religious teaching you have more like less granular and more open to things that are like better for people's lives. So it's less likely to involve like really deeply pushing things that are, for example, like you know, sort of extremely arbitrary restrictions on the ability you have to behave that are unique to a singular religion, insofar as clearly if those are things that are not practiced by all these other legitimate religions, they are not of tantamount importance to your salvation. What this means that like lots of things that end up being super regressive, for example, you know, like particular religious opinions about like gay people, for example, are less able to be perpetuated with a tool of religion, at which point these are not seen as things that are categorically necessary for salvation, given the fact that they're not practiced elsewhere. I'll take a point from closing. I saw one. Okay. Are you speaking?
Sorry, do you hear me now?
Yes.
So sorry, do you think that Mother of Srebrenica will just silently accept these ideas of religious pluralism or likely go to more extreme versions of Islam?
That who would? Okay, well, I think broadly speaking, according to the definition, the assumption in this debate, and this is like how debate works, is that we're assuming that religions are doing this. I think that to the extent that this is a thing that happens in a large number of circles, extremism is on some level less likely. One of the big reasons this is true is that let's say that we're going to adopt the stance that like some religions will adopt this, but not all. I think one of the reasons why you have insularity within religious communities is the idea, and this goes to, I think, the second argument that we're going to be pushing, is that like you have a strong incentive to create isolation when you believe that someone teaching you their own like false religion or proselytizing can mean that your child like adopts these ideas and burns in hell forever, right? The consequences then for interacting with these people, even if they're not that likely to persuade you, are like horrible, which incentivizes this isolation. At which point other religions adopt this, not yours. You have greater certainty that they're going to not try as hard to proselytize to you because they don't necessarily believe that it's tantamount that you believe this to not go to hell, which means your relative fear and need to isolate from them, even if you don't yourself adopt this premise, is going to be improved. What this means is that even those religions that do not directly adopt this are less likely to want social isolation or violence against other groups because they perceive them as less of a direct threat to their existence. I think what this means is you get greater like cross-cultural exchange, at which point people are more willing to like live alongside people of other religious backgrounds, not necessarily worry as much about having like set like school like insular schools. And what this means is that like sort of negative traits of communities that are separate from their religion, i.e. like a lot of communities that don't necessarily like have explicit text that says something about being like super misogynistic might end up being super misogynistic. And to the extent that that's true, the insularity that's created by these social lines that are created when people like are afraid of other religions like make it very difficult for people to leave those communities. To the extent that you now get like more diverse communities, it's easier for people that feel oppressed within a certain space to go elsewhere and to be exposed to those ideas. I also think your religious experience is improved when you're able to learn from other religions, you know, like as a religion that believes in a greater degree of like religious tolerance, right? When you're able to look at how other religions achieve salvation and like pick and choose things from that that are legitimate because you see them as all like being like worthwhile. I think this means that it's not just that you can shop around and find a religion that works for you, but it feels more justifiable to construct your own religion based on like the collective beliefs of other places, which I think gives you a more satisfying path to religious salvation and happiness within your life. For all those reasons, very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech and invite the member of OP to start the case with CO.
Just let me know.
We can hear you now. We only heard the last bit of that though.
Speak loudly, okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The motion says that advocating for this is in the interest of the religious people. No one guarantees that they are all of a sudden just going to accept this new preaching. We think that this attempt at advocating for pluralism gives way for radical clerics that to push their radical ideas, where on the contrary, they wouldn't have this platform. Two things in closing opposition. One, on radicalization. This is the most important part of this debate. Secondly, on small religions that are oppressed and why this is terrible for them. Let's start from the top on radicalization. I think this is very important. Look, the way this looks like is currently dominant clerics attempting to sell this story of pluralism to their congregation. But the problem is that no one guarantees that people buy this story, right? Multiple reasons, 6 of them in particular, why this is unlikely to happen. Firstly, no matter that you're an important cleric, you can be in the wrong, and people know this. Notice that people have seen many mistakes of the church in the past. Things such as sex scandals, briberies, even the Pope being wrong by sending thousands of people to different bloody wars. Secondly, you're born into this religion. Your parents telling you that you need to be a part of this. Your school, your community, and all these kinds of things. The church has all the incentives to make you really, really believe in this, especially given that people are leaving the religion as per opening government's analysis. This means that people are heavily indoctrinated into believing that they're morally superior and they're right to believe in this church or this religion. Thirdly, you believe that you deserve the best from this religion because you give out the most compared to other people. You feel like you are following very, very strict rules, not having sex, eating particular things, while other people are not necessarily following this. You believe that you deserve the most from this church. But more importantly, it is very easy for radicals to sell you the story that this is a very heretic thing, that this is heresy, right? Notice that for a lot of people this is weird. How can it all of a sudden just be different? How can it all of a sudden change, right? There are 2 additional very important things to note here. Firstly, people see this as a huge attack on their identity, right? They want to protect their religion. They want to protect what they have believed in their whole entire lives, right? And the radicals are exactly the people that are very likely to give you this, because they're the ones that are selling the narrative, that they're doing exactly that, protecting you and the church that you have believed in your entire life from all of these heretic New Age religions or New Age clerics that don't know shit. Finally, you equalize what the story they're telling you is we need to equalize ourselves with others that you have until yesterday believed are incredibly immoral. This is especially true in places where you had religious conflict, right? Places such as Bosnia or India and these kinds of places. So what the cleric is telling you, okay, starting today, you're exactly the same, morally speaking, as your neighbor who oppressed you, as the person that belongs to a church that has all for eternity been immoral to you as a person. We think that people are very unlikely to buy this narrative, right? And notice this beats a lot of this debate so far, because a lot of the teams, both teams on government, if nothing else, presume that this is something that people are just all of a sudden going to buy, and they give you thousands of impacts of why this is true. We tell you that this is not something that people are likely to buy in the first place. But more importantly than just not buying this, we think that this gives a rise of radicals, right? These are the people who tell you that this is wrong, that this is heresy. These are the people that tell you that we need to go back to the roots, to what we have been preaching previously, and these kinds of things. Now they have a podium, they have a stance, and you're giving them this. Why did they not have this podium previously? This is the comparative, right? Firstly, because the identities of people were not violated. They didn't feel like they had their whole selves, the whole identities attacked by some new age preachings. Secondly, the authority of the more important top clerics was not diminished, but now it is because they're selling the story that people are not buying. But thirdly, there is no moral association of Bosniaks and Serbs, people who believe that the other group has heavily oppressed them, even to the genocide and these kinds of things. Why, just generally speaking, having more radicals is bad for religion and stuff like this. But since the motion wants us to talk about people who belong to the religion, there are many reasons why having more radicals is terrible for them. Firstly, you're constantly paranoid, constantly believe that you're under attack, that your church is under attack, that you need to protect it. This is something that also militarizes people into doing terrible stuff against the other group, because you constantly feel it's very easy to sell you the narrative that you're being attacked. But secondly, you're incredibly coerced. These radicals are usually more coercive, right? They have more control over you. They ask for more money, more doing weird stuff that the religion wants you to do, these kinds of things. Thirdly, they're usually more enclosed. They're more traditionalist in views. They're less progressive and these kinds of things. Fourthly, this gives you worse relationship with your neighbors, with other religions and these kinds of things. Notice, a lot of religious people live literally door to door to people who belong to other religions. If you're more radical, you're less likely to have good relationship with them, especially given that this radical cleric is selling you the narrative that that guy over there is the one that's trying to sell you this narrative and take your identity away and morally equalize himself with you. That is the moment in which you have worse relationships. I want to talk about small and oppressed religions as well, because look, when you belong to a small oppressed religion, such as Muslims in India, Serbs in Bosnia, you need to believe that even though you have been oppressed, there is justice at the end of the day, and that you are actually the one that is right and they are the one that are wrong. I'm going to explain this argument a bit more. I'll take opening.
The basis for this argument is that in response to past religious conflict, we're going to get radicalism. But because of the power of religious belief and religious leaders, it's likely that even in the long run, and the debate goes well into the future, that people are less likely to want to be radicals in the first place. So on weighing, it seems relatively symmetric.
No, this is not true. I gave you 6 reasons why people are very likely to be more radicalized. This is something that works long-term as well. They're going to sell you this narrative more and more. But even if it's short-term, why do you want more radicalism even in the short term? I don't get that point, right? So as I was saying, look, even though you were oppressed, you need to believe that at the end of the day, you are in the right and they're in the wrong. This looks like, yes, we were oppressed, but we believe in the right God. Yes, we were oppressed, but we'll go to heaven and they'll go to heaven. There is salvation for us and punishment for your oppressors and these kinds of things. But when you relativize this stuff and say, it's all equal, it's all fine, we're all just one big family, you believe that you also legitimize their actions. You believe that they have heaven for themselves, that their actions are also legitimate in their own eyes. You feel terrible. You feel the religion has abandoned you. You don't necessarily feel like you have the closure of this religion and the closure of heaven that is coming to you and not to them. You're also more radicalized. All of these things are incredibly important. Very happy to stand in closing up.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech and invite the government whip to conclude the case for closing gov.
Can everyone hear me?
You're audible.
Great. Just give me 1 second. The unique thing that we brought you in this debate on closing government was framing about how exactly religions were going to engage in this process. And I think that this is ultimately what's going to win us the round. I want to start by dealing with both op teams, and then I'm going to do some weighing against our front half, but I'll start with OO. So OO basically brings us this case about people feeling very confused about their religion, the level of anxiety and moral panic that this brings on, and how this is fundamentally incompatible with religions that tell you they're monotheistic. I have a couple responses here. First, I want to point out that I think that religious leaders can just adopt messaging that like promotes that these types of things exist. And I'm going to characterize what this looks like for you. We have, for example, the fact that the Pope is God's messenger. And so if he says this, people kind of have to get on board with it. The reason that like conservative Catholics are angry when Pope Francis does progressive things is not because they think that what he said is not true. It's because they know that it's true and it angers them that they're wrong. But the second thing is just like scripture interpretation that we think a lot of people are down with, and you can like change the meaning of things. This has happened over time to like, you know, make homosexuality more accepted by a lot of religious institutions. The wording in a lot of these things is quite flexible. If you look at the first commandment that OO references, the phrasing is no other gods before me. Maybe we can say it's okay if they're beside you. Like there are ways that we can change these types of things. But on top of that, I think that there's also just the fact that this will happen over a long time frame and get grandfathered in. I'm going to talk more about that later. But finally, there's just the framing of like, we can do this in a way that makes people recognize that there are commonalities between their religions and other religions. We can do this in a way that like makes people realize that it is not a sin, especially if your religious leader, who is the messenger for God, tells this to you. You're not going to think that it's contradictory to your religion because they're literally the one that decides what the religion is. So I think that this just like doesn't work with the way that most religions share messaging. But second, I want to talk about the choice anxiety material that we get from OO. So I think that it's fair to say that religious doubt occurs to people on both sides of the house. People have crises of faith for a variety of reasons. Yes, it's probably true that in a world where you think that there are other legitimate options that may also lead to your salvation, you are more likely to doubt your own religion that you're born into and pursue other options. But I think that there are a lot of differences in the way that this plays out when we have this messaging being promoted. Note that in Ops world, doubt literally equates to hell. Heresy is a sin. Apostasy is a sin. There is either your religion or there is being an atheist. So you have like, I'm not super happy, but I'll be saved, versus I am an atheist. So I need to either like really stop believing in God, which is very hard for a lot of people who are religious to do, or accept that I'm going to hell. But in our world, we think doubt has much less bad consequences. Salvation is still within reach. If you say there are a lot of parts of my religion that I don't necessarily agree with, or I don't necessarily like, or even just the religious community around me is full of like people that I don't particularly care for, I can still pursue other religions, and I don't have to worry that like I'm going to make the wrong choice and it's going to send me to hell, because my religious leaders literally tell me that that is not the case and that I will still be saved even if I decide to look elsewhere. The takeaway here, and the thing that I want to weigh out against us versus OO, is that we tell you how religions prey on fear, and fear is uniquely exacerbated in their world when you only have that trade-off of like hell or nothing. And I think that this is how you end up coercing, this is how religions end up coercing people into violence, into exploiting you for your money and things like that. So I think we take it over OO just because their conception of how this would happen is incredibly unrealistic and uncharitable. Next, I want to deal with CO. First, they give you a bunch of reasons why it is that people are just not going to buy into this. The first thing I just want to point out is the time frame. We can do this slowly. So it would start off with your religious leaders talking about like unity and the things that all religions have in common, and then eventually they can like build up to this. We don't need to like throw it all out there in like, you know, service tomorrow. Second, I think that there's just the level of exposure that normalizes this idea and makes people come around for it. So when you see your religious leaders espousing this, when you see other people in your congregation, other people from neighboring religious congregations also agree in this, it kind of feels true in a universal way. And I think that this ends up swaying people. Third, I think that you can have multiple interpretations in each sect. This is just something that already exists. This is a fact. And each, and like even within each different parish, you will have a different religious leader in the status quo that has slightly different views on like how the religion ought to be and how it works. But you still think that people who go to other parishes or are parts of other sects of your same religion are going to go to heaven in the status quo. We are just widening that perception a tiny bit so that it says, well, other people that have a lot of the same moral values rooted and born from religion you and still believe in some sort of higher power are also going to do that thing. It's not a huge logical jump for a lot of people. But four, I think that there's just reasons why people kind of can't defect, right? Like you have to listen to the Pope, but also you respect these people for a variety of reasons. Sure, for every like one sex scandal that a religious leader has, there's another 100 that people feel deeply connected to because they're pillars in your community. They've studied the subject that you care about deeply. They've dedicated their life to it. They are often spiritual advisors. They help you like through problems in your marriage. They help you when you are a student and you don't know what to study in university. These people have very large roles in the community, and so there's a degree of credibility that plays out. But finally, on this idea of radicalization, first, again, I want to point out the time frame here. It's not like we're doing this immediately. Second, I think that this is just an argument from CO in general against like changing religions at all because people might be angry and radicalized. And I think that that's like something that A, has been proven to be false as religions have liberalized throughout the years, but B, is not a great argument against doing anything. But also, I just think that it's true that there will always be some conservatives who fight against these things. Before I do that, I'll take opening.
Saying that your God is the only authority in the universe is the primary way through which religions legitimize themselves. It's not a minor contradiction. It's the ultimate sin. You can reinterpret one paragraph to say that you support gay rights, but this is the primary principle of every single religion.
Legitimize themselves in a lot of ways. They say that we provide you with community. They say that we provide you with the best moral values that are available to you, right? Like, saying that this is the only God and like you're screwed if you don't believe it is not one of the only ways religions do this. They also do it through like kindness and charity. Lots of ways religions can legitimize themselves. Finally, I want to weigh us against our opening. They bring up some generic benefits of recruitment and having like slightly more connection to your faith when you opt in and things like that. I think that this is fairly diffuse compared to the very concentrated benefit that Jacob brings you about the harms of social isolation. And this is particularly true in the case of vulnerable people, right? Children who don't have any say in what religion they have to practice, people who are oppressed by their communities but otherwise wouldn't be exposed culturally to any other alternatives. So they think that it is literally this or something worse from their current state of oppression. For those reasons, incredibly proud to propose. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech and invite the opposition whip to complete the case for closing up and the debate as a whole. You were not audible for the first part of that. Only very vaguely.
If just give me 30 seconds, okay?
Oh no, you're better now. You are more audible.
Okay, now it's better. Okay, so I'll try to yell. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, I'm not debating from home, so I'm not that accustomed. Give me 10 seconds and I'll start. Also, like, because this is recorded and everything, I'm going to talk about war, genocide. If you don't want to listen about it, feel uncomfortable, just maybe it's time to turn off. Okay. This debate doesn't occur in countries like, let's say, Spain, where, you know, people are generally getting educated, don't care that much about the religion, and then pick and choosing what kind of things they want to have. Given that opening government explains that these things are already happening in the status quo, probably there is a little significance for people who think that texts that say that Earth is only 7,000 years old, they think that this is just ridiculous, and then they would rather, you know, think of chakras, about some energy, some other thing that they find more intuitive. Probably there is a little comparative for these people if then, you know, Pope says, you know, it's easy to, you know, convert, Islam is morally sane and like basically the same thing as Christianity. Now, let's firstly deal with the responses from where does it occur? It mostly occurs when there is some religious heterogeneity, when there are some religious conflicts, and there are some like more religious people there. Let's firstly talk about responses we receive from closing government. One is this is going to happen slowly. Firstly, not really sure how we can have this slowly and then have all these huge benefits happening on your side. If you want to have people so they can easily pick and choose what they want from your religion, which religion want to join, then you cannot have this so much slowly happening. But also, I'm not sure how can exactly this slowly can happen. How can you slowly say to people the fact that you are fasting, that you are not eating from the dawn to dusk, that you need to pray 5 times a day? Doesn't matter. Is it morally and religiously same as a Christian that doesn't do any of these things? You cannot slowly introduce these stuff, right? You just need to, if you preach for these ideas, this is just a very common sense for people to get there. But if you can do it to some extent slowly, we're not sure that exactly our harms are not happening, because even at some point, people will feel actually that they are endangered and all the harms regarding radicalization will happen. Then they say, but leaders and like people care about their leaders. It is true, but there are limits. There are things like schism in Christianity. There is later Protestantism, that when people felt that, Pope saying that you can just pay for your sins and maybe too much. You have people like, Mormons that have, believe that John Smith was a new Messiah, things like that. There are always people who try to question these like religious leaders. The question is that many people don't want to follow them. They ask for them more. They ask either more money for them or to more adhere, or to behave in certain ways, etc., etc. But however, at the moment when people feel endangered and they feel that their identity is harmed, we believe that the more people will actually feel scared. And if closing argument is correct in their responses, that fear is the mechanism of religion in indoctrinating and coercing people, then I would posit that more fear on our side, because your crux of your identity is harmed, is actually means that more fear is used by radical fractions there. And there are always radical fractions, either, certain priests that will be radical, something like that, some individuals that would try to create, a fraction, a schism or something like that, or even personally, you as an individual can feel more radical. Probably there are, differences in terms of how much you interact. What are these things? What Đorđe tells you? What are some like why this radicalization is going to happen? One is you feel that your identity is harmed. Why? Because religion is a moral, the umbrella identity of these people. Usually they were harmed. They were victims of genocide. People wanted to exterminate them because they were part of that religion. They're seen primarily as that member of religion. Religion gave them all moral guidance. What you need to do, very strict rules, what you need to do to go to heaven or hell. We believe that all of these stuff, when they are relativized and say, it is relatively the same as people from other religion that you were in war with, then people feel that they are not morally superior anymore, that there are no moral virtue in them adhering to that particular religion, and that also all their identity, all their parents, everyone dying for that religion, for practicing that religion, was just in vain, because it didn't matter that they were just part of this religion or others. They might as well convert it. All Serbs that died genocide in Croatia during the World War II, just think of, but what my parents did, just stupid, they should just convert it, because Catholicism is the same as Orthodoxy. Then when you create these people are more likely to become radicalized. No responses to all these ideas, only they're going to do it slowly. Sorry, this is not a response. Now, what else we have? Why radicalization is bad? Now, not what opening opposition has. Opening opposition has, heaven is the biggest thing that you can get, the biggest reward that you can receive in life. We agree. But we are questionable to which extent it is exclusive to this particular debate. Because the logic of opening opposition is that the religious books will tell you one thing, and religious leaders will tell it doesn't matter, so people, some of them will feel confused, etc. It is unclear why, for example, some people might not say, okay, I'm stick to the book, and then feel less confused. It is not clear why exactly, to how much these ideas are comparative. It's probably comparative to some extent, but not sure why it matters. Đorđe brings you three differentiation. Firstly, he gave you reasons how these books are abused, because the radical members of these religions use them to jeopardize and to play on the fear of people. Secondly, that because you feel the attack on your identity, that then you are more likely to have harms on yourself. Firstly, you're constantly feeling paranoid. Am I being a very good Christian enough? Am I doing these things wrong, etc.? Because these leaders want you to do that. Secondly, you have a worse relations with your neighbors, because nowadays, maybe if you're a Muslim woman in Sarajevo, before I proceed, actually opening, do you have BOI?
The reason that local priests and religious leaders try to align themselves with major religious bodies is to receive funding, legitimacy, and built-in supporters. Why would they defect from the main religious body, especially if they are shamed by the top-down hierarchy?
Okay, sorry. Because not all religions are centralized, and because these supporters themselves will not buy them, so therefore they can use, donations. There will be rich people from, that village that will put a lot of money to build that church, on etc. People will give their small own donations, and then there will be some, people whose interest would be to portray this. This is insufficient reasons, and there will, for us, it's not everyone. Some will adhere, we agree, but some of them will not, and these people will gain more traction. Now, what are the problems with radicalism? You have worse relations with your your neighbor. Nowadays, maybe you as a Muslim woman wouldn't be very happy, maybe because your children are dating Serbs, but maybe now you'll prohibit them from even hanging out with them because you'll feel them as threat, because your leaders, the higher ups, are saying that these things are the same, and your identity and suffering is trivialized, and you're afraid of assimilation and this happening. Note that what we brought you in this debate. We brought you where this debate has the most comparative, where it has the most impact, and why these people will be harmed the more by the mechanism of radicalization. No one responded to our mechanism of radicalization, rather that they're going to do it slowly. It's not good enough.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech and everyone for an interesting debate. This is an open round, so if you go back, we'll call you in about 15 minutes.